homosexuality as an acceptable biblical lifestyle have found ways to tweak or reinterpret the text. Now, Dr. Walter Winks admits that it unequivocally condemns same-sex behavior. But he theorizes that an ancient Hebrew saw any sexual activity which would not lead to the creation of life, I don't know, as a form of abortion or murder. That goes back to the abortion question. Is abortion murder? Absolutely it is. That's a human being. But don't let me get off in the weeds on that. His theory is that all of the Hebrews saw any sexual activity that would not lead to the creation of life as a form of abortion or murder. He says that the Jews could have seen homosexuality as an alien behavior, representing yet one more incursion of pagan civilization into Jewish life. So he's suggesting that the pagans of the time were homosexual, they were okay with it, and that it was no problem. He then says the penalty for homosexual behavior, if a man lies with one as he lies with the woman, both of them that have done what is detestable, they must be put to death. Their blood will be on their own heads. That's Leviticus 20:13. Now, in his reasoning, if we see this punishment for homosexuality as obsolete today, we should see its prohibition of this behavior is equally outdated. He's saying it's outdated. The Bible is outdated. It needs to change with the times. Just like our government's telling us about our Constitution and our Bill of Rights. It needs to change with the times. Well, he concludes his argument against making Leviticus 18:22 for sexual ethics today by citing a list of other biblical ethics he considers to be obsolete or in need of reinterpretation. Intercourse during menstruation, polygamy, concubines, and slavery. And that's not all. Other critics see the Leviticus law as an expression of worship codes, not universal moral standards. They argue that all of these laws were intended for their day and time, like kosher dietary laws or harvest regulations. But the fact is, even things like the kosher dietary laws and the harvest regulations are still used today. I mean, how many farmers rotate their fields? Because you have to let the field rest once in a while. You have to let it rebuild its nutrients and the growing, life-giving nutrients that's in the dirt to make the plants grow. It needs, just like we have a day of rest. We sleep at night because we need that time to rejuvenate. He tells us one day out of the 7 to rejuvenate ourselves by not working on that one day, because we need to rejuvenate ourselves. And that works across the board, the same as it does with the harvest regulations. You can't plant the same field every single year for 100 years and think that that's still going to have enough nutrients and everything that's needed in it to grow your crops. It has to have a period of rest, just like we do, just like everything else does. So, is there an objective way to talk about this? To talk about somebody who says that these kosher laws, and the kosher laws really are just health. I mean, this is just, the kosher laws were designed to tell the Jewish people, if you want to stay healthy, here's how you should eat. These are the kosher laws. Do not eat anything that's not kosher. Do not eat that nasty pork, because these pigs eat their food at the same place where they defecate. Oh, I mean, that dirty animal, when he's mixing his own defecation in with his food. I mean, come on. That's nasty. So, first, let's consider this claim that the Old Testament law has no relevance for New Testament believers. They're saying that all of these Old Testament things that are talked about with homosexuality have no relevance once we have this new covenant. Once Christ came and we became Christians and everything changed. Well, they're saying, well, that changed too, and it has no relevance today. Well, but should we be classified with the kosher laws and with these laws of the harvest regulation as being not something that applies to us today, even though it does apply to us today? A basic rule of biblical interpretation is that any Old Testament teaching which is repeated in the New Testament carries the weight and command to the Christian church and the faith today the same as it did then. If it's in the Old Testament and it's repeated in the New Testament, it's still relevant today. And even some that is not repeated in the New Testament is still relevant for our lives today. The prohibition against homosexuality and its activity are seen throughout the New Testament. Romans 1:26 and 27. This is a passage that we're going to look at in a few minutes. So hang with me on that. Even the Old Testament statements, which are not repeated, still have the same force of principle. Okay, there's also is the claim of the Leviticus passage as an expressive worship code, not moral standard. Well, I think it's clearly a moral standard, and there's plenty throughout the entire Bible to keep this in context that it is a moral standard. It's listed with a long list of other moral standards. I mean, the law was given to us as human beings to show us our sin, to show us what's good and what's bad, what's accepted and what's evil. The logic is that it's written with regard to the Levitical priest and their duties of worship, that Leviticus was for them and not for us, does not apply to the larger family of faith. However, the chapter has a question that begins with this. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them," that's in 18:1. Nothing in this chapter limits its applications or significance to Levites. Rather, the chapter exhorts all Israel to keep my decrees and laws, for the man who obeys them will live by them. It proceeds to forbid incestuous relationships, child sacrifice, bestiality standards, and these are universal. And, actually, these are built into us. I mean, these standards are built in. You don't have sex with animals. I mean, you don't need a written law that says not to do that, whether it's by God or man. I mean, the normal functioning mind that's not of Sodom and Gomorrah, who's not turned to bestiality or child sacrifice, which, child sacrifice, that's really kind of an abortion issue, even though, don't let me get off on abortion again. Let me stick to my guns here. Oh, can't say guns. Oh, I'm sorry about that. I can't say guns. Every time I say guns, then I'm sure the UN or the feds that monitor these kind of programs got their little pins out and they're going, all right, 3 times he said guns, 4 times he said gun, 5. Well, let's look at the idea of slavery, because it's a common argument, and I've heard it so many times, that the Bible condones slavery. Who wants to follow a God that condones slavery? He never said it was wrong. He never said blah, blah, blah. And they go on and on and on about that. Well, you remember I said in the beginning of the program, we're going to talk about this slavery. We're going to talk about what slavery was. And like I said in the beginning of the program, there's a lot of times that slaves were abused. mentally, physically, sexually. Just it was the same as today. There are a lot of people who are abused the same way. But slavery had some other context to it. Slavery was not 100%. It wasn't like it was here in America when they started bringing people over from Africa and putting them in slavery. That's our idea of slavery. That's not necessarily what slavery was then. Slavery was an accepted part of life in Old Testament times. Now, we know of no culture or ancient literature which questions the existence or its necessity. People became slaves in a variety of ways. They were born to enslaved parents. You see that in Genesis 17:23. They were purchased. Human beings were sold in Genesis 37:28. Some sold themselves to pay a debt. And you see that in Leviticus 25, verse 39 through 55. People would sell themselves into slavery, take that money, and pay off old debts. Now, slavery was not necessarily a lifetime thing, but I'll get to that in a minute. Breaking into a home was punished by enslavement. That was your punishment. Exodus